What if I told you that the United States government once weaponized the weather itself? Not a conspiracy theory, not a rumor, a fully declassified covert military operation that the Pentagon hid from Congress, hid from the American people, and when it was finally exposed, was so heinous that the entire world was so disturbed that they created an international treaty to ban it. This is the dark history of Operation Popeye. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what is this Operation Popeye that you're talking about? Operation Popeye was a cloud seeding program done by the US military during the Vietnam War over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. If you don't know what the Ho Chi Minh Trail is, it was a 16,000 kilometer long jungle covered supply line that was used by the North Vietnamese. It was used to transport weapons, supplies, soldiers, anything that you need in a military context, they were bringing it through that supply line. And the US military tried their hardest to bomb the shit out of that place and make it completely unusable. But since it was covered by a dense triple layered jungle canopy, it was essentially impossible for the US military to do aerial surveillance, so they didn't know who was going where, what was coming through what direction, and they also had multiple different paths on the trail that made it hard for them to know which one was being used and which one was just a dummy. It was also manned by over 300,000 Vietnamese volunteers, many including women and children. They would help the soldiers bring supplies across, help them bring vehicles across, help them dig out tunnels to be able to get across without being spotted or bombed. It was a pretty insane system of logistics when you really think about it, and I'm pretty impressed that people that had such a technological disadvantage were able to be so innovative and even be able to bring a powerful empire and military like the US to their knees. So the US decided to drop as many ordinances on that area as they could. More ordnance was dropped on the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the Vietnam War than was used by every single country in the entirety of World War II. Unfortunately, even with that much firepower used, it was to no avail. The US military was being embarrassed by a jungle supply line being used by a bunch of farmers. The US military couldn't have that. So what did they do? They decided to play God by manipulating weather itself. Now you may be wondering to yourself, well, Manit, this must have been something small, very minor in scale, but no, that's where you'd be wrong. There's hundreds of different flight missions over Laos, North Vietnam, and Cambodia, operating out of Udon Air Base in Thailand. The program was so highly classified and so confidential that even the pilots that were flying the missions themselves were told that they would list them as simply weather reconnaissance. This was completely off of the books from all normal military reporting channels, so it was hard for this kind of information to leak. They increased the rainfall by an estimated 30% above the normal monsoon levels. This was industrial scale weather manipulation carried out in complete secrecy during the middle of a war and across a 5-year period. For those of you that don't know what cloud seeding is or how geoengineering works, let me give you a brief explanation. The US military would take aircrafts, primarily WC-130s and RF-4Cs, to fly over target areas over the trail. They'd disperse silver iodide, lead iodide crystals into existing cloud formations. These chemicals would cause the water vapor to condense faster, creating heavier rainfall than natural monsoons. This increased the rainfall by 30% above the levels usually seen on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. With that much rainfall, obviously the trail would get flooded, it would get covered in mud, wash out supply lines and underground supply lines that they had dug out. It would just flood the entire area and make one of the most important supply lines for the North Vietnamese become essentially useless. And the craziest part is, for the 5 years that Operation Popeye was running, it was classified to even the highest levels of the government. Nobody outside of the Pentagon knew what was going on, not Congress, not the American people, not even the grunts that were fighting inside those exact same jungles for the US military, which to me might be the most disturbing fact of all. Imagine being forced in a draft to go and fight in a war that you didn't even want to fight. You're fighting against people that have nothing left to lose. People that are using the most depraved, dangerous guerrilla tactics that war had ever seen up until that point. And then your government's just dumping rain on you, making it way harder for you to go on patrols in the jungle because of the mud, making it harder for you to see, making it harder for helicopters to come be able to evacuate you or land. When you really think about it, not only was the US military fucking over the Vietnamese with Operation Popeye, but they also fucked over their own soldiers that they sent there to die. Kinda messed up when you think about it, but is it even really that surprising? We all know how the US military is, and we all know how the US government is as well. Now the question raises, well Manny, if this was so top secret and so classified, how could it all have even gotten out in the first place? And let me explain to you how it got exposed. It was exposed two ways simultaneously. A military analyst named Seymour Hersh, the same journalist who broke the My Lai massacre, started picking up whispers about it. Then in 1972, an investigative journalist named Jack Anderson published a column directly revealing the program existed, based on a leaked Pentagon document. Senator Claiborne Pell then launched a Senate Senate hearing forcing the government to acknowledge it, and the rest is history. The government declassified the program, and the world was exposed to the horrors that were Operation Popeye. In the aftermath of Operation Popeye's exposure, the world was horrified to learn that the US military had somehow been able to weaponize God's own creation, weather itself. The exposure of Popeye directly led to international negotiations resulting in the Environmental Modification Convention signed in 1977. Known as the ENMOD, it prohibits military or hostile use of environmental modification techniques that have widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. 48 nations signed it. The fact that the international community felt the need to create a specific treaty banning weather warfare tells you everything about how seriously this was taken at the time. You may be asking yourself now at the end of the video, why does this matter, Manit? This was all 60 years ago and they signed a treaty, so obviously they aren't doing that anymore. But let's think about it like this. In 1967, they could increase rainfall by 30% using technology that was primitive by modern standards. The treaty banned hostile use. It didn't say anything about domestic or experimental use. DARPA has continued weather modification research. Look into the HARP research facility in Alaska. The Chinese government openly cloud seeds regularly and is an entire government agency dedicated to it. And I'm sure we all remember the viral videos from just a couple years ago of the cloud seeding that went wrong in Dubai and caused the city to have massive floods, so much so that the entire streets were flooded. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, again, if it's been 60 years and people are still doing the cloud seeding that they did 60 years ago, do you really think that they haven't developed that technology any further? What do you think it could be possible to do with it now? Create tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, who knows? I'm not going to tell you one thing or another as a verified fact, but there's a lot of strange things going on in the world these days, so it's just good to be informed. Like I said, if they did it 60 years ago, who's to say they're not still doing it now? But it's been your boy King Manu, aka Mani. Thank you for watching my video. I love you. Goodbye.